Hi, everyone. I think it's time to get started now. Hopefully, folks are able to get their way onto Zoom. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar as part of our DAP Learning Series on using the analytics.usa.gov API. My name's Tim Loudon, and I'm the Program Manager for the Digital Analytics Program. We're happy that you could all join us today, and we thank you for bearing with us on the last-minute link change. It seems that there's a bit of a glitch going on with YouTube Live today, which is the platform we usually use for our trainings. But thanks to the great folks at the DigitalGov University team, we were able to switch to the Zoom link here. So one thing about Zoom, if you have done trainings with us before, is that you may notice that everyone should be muted, but you can unmute yourself. And I actually hear someone talking in the background right now. So I ask you all on the call, if you are unmuted, please mute yourself. And throughout the entire call, we request that you stay muted. And if you have questions, you put them in the chat box rather than doing them audially. So luckily, we've got my colleague, Freddie Blicker, who will be monitoring the chat and also will be relaying questions to me during the questions period at the end of this discussion. As always, we'll be following up with everyone who is registered attending today with resources on the Digital Analytics Program. And also, the slides are available on the digital.gov event page for this event. So you can go and check out the slides there. And finally, in that follow-up, there will also be a survey asking you how we did today and how we can improve. And if you can fill out that survey, we read every answer, and it can be anonymous, but it really helps us make sure that we're creating content that's valuable to you. So this is also an interesting course today in that it's usually, our trainings are usually geared towards the internal government audience. But today we kind of not only hope that we have our usual government and contractor friends with us, but also maybe some folks that are not part of government who are just interested in using the analytics.usa.gov API. Whew, that was long-winded. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I think in order to understand the reason why we created the analytics.usa.gov API and what it's all about is to start with the history of analytics.usa.gov and really get a feel of where this data comes from if you're not previously familiar with that. So we started out in 2012. The Digital Government Strategy created the Digital Analytics Program. And the idea behind this was basically there are thousands of government websites that live in hundreds of subdivisions of agencies that scale up to maybe a cabinet level department or maybe an independent agency. But there was really no way for us to get aggregated web analytics that to help us understand from a bird's eye view what the most popular content was across government, what kinds of technologies people were using to access that content, and as a secondary sort of thing, at the time, not even all government websites were using web analytics tools, whether it be Google Analytics or other tools. And so the Digital Analytics Program creation was sort of twofold. It was one, to make sure that government websites were using web analytics tools, and in this case, Google Analytics is the one that the Digital Analytics Program uses, and also so that we could be as granular as a single click on a page, but scale up to across all of government. For example, what's our browser usage like? Can we stop supporting old browsers? What is our mobile versus tablet versus desktop percentages like? So that was the basis behind the creation. The first 2 years of the program were really just trying to get buy-in from agencies and get participation. Because the way the Digital Analytics Program works, we're here at GSA and we don't manage all these websites across agencies, so we had to ask them to actually implement and start sending data to our aggregated account. So once we got to a decent level of agencies, in 2014, the CTO at the time, the White House CTO at the time, Megan Smith, was taking a tour of the building, and we just had sort of a real-time dashboard for straight out of Google Analytics, like the run-of-the-mill Google Analytics real-time report was just showing on a big TV. And so she asked what that was, and we told her what it was, and she said, "My goodness, we should really think about making this data public." And we had always thought about doing that, but we didn't know what the timeline was. And when the White House CTO says we should do it, that's a good impetus. So we started building analytics.usa.gov in 2014, and we released it in March 2015. And in a little bit, I'm going to do a quick tour of the site itself. But from 2015 to 2017, we worked to expand what the site offered. So it started out as a single-page dashboard that only showed data that was web analytics for the government-wide roll-up for all participating sites. And we added agency pages, so we made it so that you could toggle the data by agency. We added more types of data and visualizations and files for download, and we began the work on an API. And most recently, in 2018 into 2019, we did some more work on the API to add new filters, which I think are really beneficial and will hopefully help you if you are going to use the API yourself. So that's sort of the history behind it all. I did say that I was going to very briefly talk about what an API is today. And I think most of the people who are deciding to attend this probably are somewhat familiar with an API. But if you're not, that's okay. When I first came to GSA in 2013, I was pretty clueless about what an API was. So I've embedded, and it's available in the slides here, but I've embedded this video from our wonderful colleague, Gray Brooks. It's a bit old. I think he recorded it 6 years ago, but it's a heck of a video. It's about 7 minutes long. We're not going to watch it here, but I would recommend for anyone that wants to get a bit of a primer on what APIs do and why they're important, you can watch this video. It's one of the most viewed on the DigitalGov channel, and it's always good to see our friend Gray talking about APIs. So I will give you my totally unofficial and non-developer definition. And I haven't given the caveat yet that so I am not a developer myself. So I am not the person that is going to write code to create software to consume information from this API. But I'm going to do my best today to sort of go through the documentation and explain to you what we did and how you can all do that. But anyways, my totally unofficial and non-developer definition is APIs are a structure that enables data to be shared from one system to another in a machine-readable format and in an automated fashion. So it's a way to query a data set for data and transfer it so that it can be used by other systems. So why did we build an API? I have a bit of a chart here that describes a little bit about how we built the website and the API. We have our digital analytics program, Google Analytics account, and we actually use the Google Analytics API to get information out into a tool that our friends at 18F helped us build called Analytics Reporter. And we do that, and one thing that makes it difficult for us to be able to get the public information in this method is that you have to have the Google Analytics authorization. So what we did is we proxy all the data from Google Analytics into Analytics Reporter, which stores it in a Postgres database on cloud.gov. And then from Analytics Reporter, we take those data files and we create the visualizations that you see on the website, as well as the data files that you can download in CSV and JSON. And then that's how we also run the API and fetch data for the API. One of the other interesting aspects about this is that the Google Analytics API has a limit of 10,000 queries per day. And when I first heard that a long time ago when we were building the website, I thought maybe that was 10,000 per API key. But in actuality, it's 10,000 queries per day across the entirety of the account. So we actually use almost all of those queries because we do a lot of real-time calls each day to build analytics.usa.gov. So the reason we decided to create an API was kind of also twofold. So one was when certain agencies within government were hoping to use the Google Analytics API, we couldn't grant them access directly because we were going to max out our queries. So one thing is this allows us to get folks information, at least a portion of the data that we have in Google Analytics through another method. And the other thing is that for the public who wants to try to access some of this data, once we created analytics.usa.gov, a lot of folks were asking us for historical data. And if, when I show you the site in a little bit, our data files are time limited to a certain amount of time, whereas now the API allows folks to aggregate data across a larger time span. So that was another big impetus, was getting the ability for the public to get more than just 90 days worth of data via the API. Okay, so checking it out, I do want to give you like a quick tour of the site if you're not familiar. So here is our homepage, and you by default land on the all participating websites page, which is at this point we're at around somewhere in the ballpark of 5,800 federal government public-facing websites. And you can see today there's been a little bit of an interesting one. We've got Send Your Name to Mars. That's cracking up in the top 5 there. But so we've got information about technology, devices, browsers, and operating systems. We've got folks on real-time pages. We have downloads from yesterday, the top downloads yesterday, and then a little bit of geographical information for folks visiting at this very moment. Also, you can toggle and look at, rather than pages, you can look at the top domains over the last 7 days and the last 30 days. So as you can see, this was sort of a big surprise when they implemented. The NCBI team overtook the package tracking because they offer a lot of medical information that's being accessed from all over the world. And of course, you can then change this based on cabinet level agency, or what we did is actually CFO Act agencies, but mainly the cabinet levels you can see here. If I wanted to go to commerce, then this data would all change, and it would be specific to domains that are owned by the Department of Commerce. And it is kind of interesting to toggle between the different agencies and look at, say, for example, the difference between the percentages in mobile and desktop and tablet. It's interesting to see how different agencies have different types of audiences. But with that, so in the initial site, we also created a data page. And this is still on commerce here. But you can see if I switch it to all websites, we've got basically all the information you can see on the dashboard, and actually many more rows of data than you can see on the dashboard are available in our static downloads. But as I noted, some of these are, or all of these are limited to a specific date range. So now finally getting to the API. So we've got our link to the API is actually down here at the bottom. And I think once we're out of beta, we'll also probably include it somewhere more visible up here. But for now, we're still working on it. So we've got our API project here, and that lives at analytics.usa.gov/developer. And I should just note that the documentation is all here, but sometime in the near future, we're actually also going to be, rather than having it live here, we're going to point the /developer and have it redirect at this page, which is the same documentation, but it's going to be living at open.gsa.gov, which is a project that GSA is undertaking to centralize all of the data and APIs that GSA offers, which we think is a really great effort. And you can see if you go to open.gsa.gov, there's a bunch of information, and there's a directory of all the APIs at GSA. So soon enough, it'll be pointing over here, but it's the same documentation either way. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the API, but first, just as a shout out for open.gsa.gov, that team is going to be doing some user experience tests and review. And if you're open to discussing your experiences with open.gsa.gov, please contact Ryan Day, and he's at ryan.day@gsa.gov. They're always looking for volunteers to improve that site as well. Alrighty, so getting started with the API. So the first thing you'll need to do is get an API key. And we have actually the sign up embedded right in the documentation here. So you put in your first and last name and email, and optionally you can tell us how you're planning on using the API. And you'll get an immediate return with an API key. I'm not going to actually do it right here because I'm already registered, but it's really, really simple, and that is powered via api.data.gov, which is another service that's run here by our friend Gray Brooks, that helps us get analytics on how often and how many queries the API is serving. So very, very easy. Whoop, somebody just unmuted. If you could just go ahead and mute whoever just joined. So it's very easy to go ahead and just fill this out quickly, and you get yourself an API key. Then the way that you would use that API key in a query is you attach it right at the end in a query string parameter like this, API_key equals, and today I'm just going to be using this demo key. But if you were to use it, please use a key that you register yourself. Okay. So what we've got, and before I show you these particular links, I will scroll down here a little bit. And basically, what we start with as the base for a query is to have api.gsa.gov/analytics/DAP/v1.1. And then you have a reports section that will specify the report. So in this case, it's the download report. And then we add /data, and we get the API key. So this is basically what you start with, except this report may change. And you'll get a response that I'll show you in just a moment. This is a pretty response. It won't be so pretty. It'll look more like this. But we have these reports that will show you the ID of the data point, which isn't usually very relevant, but the report name, the report agency, the date and time, and the actual data point based on the report that you're querying. So we can call all of the information, the download, traffic sources, the technology things about browser and device. The domain runs based on total visits or sessions. And I have in my slide here our most basic version if we were to just put in, and I've already loaded them all, but if I were to click on this particular link using a demo key for the domain data, this is the result that I get. And you can see here, it's not super pretty. It's in JSON format, which for those of you that use APIs frequently, you probably prefer JSON. There's only really two formats that I've seen APIs used, and that's XML and JSON. I did actually, just to show you what it would look like, I went to a pretty print, and if you drop in all this information, it'll break it up a little bit. This is just something I Googled. There are tons of these online. But you can see here, so if we break up these data points, you get a chunk that looks like this. So on May 21st, the ncbi.nlm.nih.gov received 6,272,814 visits. And we can scroll through here. The default data point limit is 1,000 data points per page. So you do have to, and we're actually going to go over the pagination function in just a moment. But the default is you will get 1,000 data points. Now, you may notice here that for this particular one, because we're doing it across all of government and it's looking at every domain, the date range is not going to change very much over the 1,000 data points. In fact, it's not going to change at all because there's more than 1,000 domains that it needs to report on. So this brings me to the first way that you can manipulate this data. And we've outlined it in the documents, and I've just copied it in here. But we've got page, so it pages through the results. If the limit's set to 1,000, which it is by default, we can then just add a query string parameter for page and specify the page, and it will render the next page. So I believe that's here. Yep, so let me just go ahead and get rid of that. So you can see here I've added page equals 10. And now we've got data that is from May 18th rather than May 22nd. So, and this could go way back. I'm not sure how quickly it'll load if I put in something like page 100, but it'll continue to go back. And for the record, I checked today, currently we have a full 2 years of data back that you can use the API to call data for. I don't know how long of a window we're going to be able to keep a long list of data in there, because we do have some limits to the storage that we have. but for sure, I will try to always make sure there's at least a year back. Right now we have 2, but we're building more every day. So we'll see how it goes. But you can see here, if I move to page 100, now we're back into April. We've got April 6th on this particular page. Okay, so that's one thing that we can do. We can do pagination by adding and page. And we also can do a limit of how many data points are served. So instead of having the default 1,000, we could say limit 20. And I think that's this one. And then you can see here, we've just got the top 20 pages as an example. I'm sorry, not pages, the top 20 domains as an example, ranked in descending order by visit in this case for this report. So that's the most basic sets here. We add and limit or and page equals, and we're able to manipulate the data that way. So one of the biggest things that we've done in our most recent work on the API is we've added in the ability to do date filters, which I think is maybe the most valuable part for the types of uses that folks have been emailing us about, that they said they'd like to use the data. And this is the big one that we're not able to do with the straight up report downloads. So in this case, and again, it's noted here a little bit. Oh, if I can find it in the querying reports, filtering based on agencies. Aha. So we've got in the query params here, we can add before and after, right? So I've copied that over here. And you can see the way that we would do it is with a query param and after equals, and it follows 4-digit year dash 2-digit month dash 2-digit day. And if you follow this format, you can set date ranges for which you'd like to fetch data for any particular report. Notice for this one, what I've done is I used and after April 21st and before April 21st. And I did that specifically to demonstrate that before and after is inclusive of the date that you have. So if I said after 4/21 and before 4/21, it will give us data for a single day. So just important to know when you're running these that it's inclusive of the date that you include in the before or after. So let me get to that one. So here is, we have our after and before put in. And now we've got data specifically for the domain report. The 21 appears over here, unfortunately, but it's for April 21st. So this is a big one, and I know that this is the one that the feature that was most requested when we first came out with the API. We didn't have the ability to filter by date. Instead, you just had to paginate until you got to that date. So I think this is a big value add. And also just shout out to Jonathan Hooper and Laura Gerhardt, who both have worked on this API and helped us out. They did great work on it. So we also have agency filters. So we're able to query a report by adding an agency name into the path. So this is a little bit different. It's not done via a query string parameter. Instead, you added in, I added in before reports. You might be able to do it either. I think you need to add it before reports. But if you add in agencies / and then you follow the agency convention, which we've listed for you up here, you can then also filter the data in the API by agency. You just have to make sure that you follow the conventions that we have here in the documentation. So we use dashes and we don't use acronyms. So if you wanted to get information for GSA, you would have to include agencies / general services administration. And this is all exemplified for you in the links that we have in the docs as well. So if we were to then do this same domain report, but we specify the agency equals commerce. Let me get to that one. Yep, here it is. So you can see here we've got agencies / commerce. We've just added that in. And now it's giving us a report only for domains that we have whitelisted as owned by the Department of Commerce. And this is where I'll make a caveat again. This data set that we have in the analytics.usa.gov is not complete. We do not have 100% participation, but we do have a lot of participation. So just wanted to make the caveat here, or the disclaimer, that this is not all federal.gov executive branch websites, but it's 5,800 of them, and most of the really large ones do participate. So we can see here, these are things like weather.gov, climate.gov, we've got USPTO. These are all domains that belong to commerce. So we filtered it that way. And finally, we have domain filters. So now, instead of being able to filter specifically for an agency, we also added the capability to single out a specific domain. So in this case, since we were talking about commerce before, I added, again, in the page path here, in the root, you would have, instead of /agencies, you'd have /domain, and you'd specify the domain. And of note, do not include HTTP or HTTPS or www. Just include whatever it is, .gov. And this also works for subdomains. So it could be, something.something.gov. You would just put that in here, and then it would filter for you. Now, not all reports are compatible with this filter, because in our tables, not all of the data points have an associated domain. But it does work for the site, domain, download, second level domain. You can use that for those reports, and it will work. And actually, it's funny, we're in beta. I think the site report and the domain report might be the same. But anyways, oops. Let's go back to that. There we go. So now what we can do is put that in, domain/census.gov. And now we have data specific to census.gov for this same domain report. Now notice domain is included twice here, but one of them is to specify the report and one of them is to specify the filter. So we're getting information, and it definitely, the date goes a lot quicker, because we are not trying to get information for 1,000 some sites now. We're just getting information for one site. So if you can get much more data in a single page, and you can also expand the limit. I mentioned that the default is 1,000, but you can expand it up to 10,000. So if I say limit equals 10,000 here, it may take a second, but we'll get 10,000 data points instead of just 1,000. So with all of these different functionalities, you can do like Animal in the Muppets. I always say to our colleague Freddie, who's going to be asking questions in a moment here, that I can't have a presentation without at least one good GIF. So here's my GIF, although that gets annoying, so let's get rid of Animal. But once you have all these capabilities, you can really query for a lot of different things. And I have an example here of specifying agency of the Department of Interior, and also specifying specific dates in the month of April, and then limiting to 10,000 rather than 1,000. And that is here. And you can see here the specific report that I did was looking at device data. So now we can see we have, for interior, we've got by day information on how many visits there were for each device. So that doesn't do percentage calculations for you, but I bet if you are a person who's a developer and using this information, you could probably write something that would turn it into percentages for you rather than hard numbers. But you can really do, I think, quite a bit for the fact that this is a pretty basic read API. You can't write anything into it, but for what we've got, I think that this is a really, really helpful way for folks to use the information. So I noted, of course, that usually APIs are being used by developers who are either taking that information and pulling it into a website or an app of some kind. But one of the things that Freddie mentioned to me that this is really good for, and I very much agree, is that we have a lot of sort of industry folks who are looking at this data to try to better understand things like browser market share or operating system market share. And previously, before we had the API, They just had to use the downloadable reports that we have to get information on this. But now what you could do is, because we have data available back 2 years, you could really set some date ranges and then get, sort of what to us non-developers looks like this ugly information. But you could take it and then put it into a JSON to CSV converter, which this is just one, again, I Googled and I found one online. And I dropped a specific URL in here. And it takes all that JSON data and it puts it very nicely into a CSV format. In this case, it's red, looking like a spreadsheet. And then if you wanted to, you could download the CSV or Excel file, and you could get, you probably do a lot more analysis, deeper analysis with various date ranges than what we have available on CSV or JSON just in the downloadable reports. So even if you've never used an API before, I think, take it from me as someone who just showed you how to work it directly through the URL here. That's how we can control everything, and you don't have to have any special systems. You can just go through the documentation and train yourself up on how to get the information you'd like to see, and then be able to download it directly to a spreadsheet file where you could do whatever you'd like, make visualizations or do pivot tables or anything like that. So that's pretty much what we've got for the API. And what's really interesting to me for the folks that are on the line is what will you all do with this data? We would love to hear whether it be internal to government, external to government, if you're doing it for nonprofit purposes, if you're doing it for academic research. We are extremely interested in hearing how you will use this data. We are obviously super big advocates of trying to put data in the open as much as possible, and we're always interested in hearing those stories. So if you are on the line right now from a government agency or from a research organization, anything like that, we'd love to hear from you. So please email us, and our email is dap@support.digitalgov.gov, and let us know what you're planning on doing with this information. We'd love to hear from you and also help in any way we can. With that, I know I kind of spoke pretty quickly here, but I got through everything I wanted to. So we definitely have some time. Are there questions? I see I have a little banner that pops up in my screen whenever someone enters anything into the chat, and it's been going crazy. So Freddie, do we have questions?
Hey, Tim, great material. We have 3 questions so far. So the first question is do you get the same usage metrics via the API as you would with the regular analytics site? And I'm assuming they're referring to DAP.
So theoretically, yes, you should get the same information. I'm not sure if this person is asking that because they found some sort of discrepancy. But yes, so we query the data directly out of Google Analytics and then put it in the analytics reporter. And then from the analytics reporter, it gets sent up through either the API or the downloadable reports. So yes, that information should match. If for some reason you don't think it's matching, please email us and we'll take a look. I would bet that maybe it's just the way that the report you're looking at is structured or the query that we have in the API is structured. So if you catch any discrepancies, definitely please ask us about it and we'll try to work through that with you.
Awesome. Okay. So the second question is, can you query sub-agencies such as HHS and NIH or even subdomains?
So that's a good question. Unfortunately, you can't query for subdomains at this point. That would be pretty tough for us to do, mainly because we'd have to somehow categorize every domain into the sub-agency owner. And it's not so hard to do that for second-level domains, as in NIH.gov. It does get much harder to do that when we talk about subdomains. So as you get the subdomains in there, that's not something that is easily fetched through the domain name service. So they can proliferate, and it's not easy for us to track down what belongs to who. So at this point, you cannot filter for specific subdomains. I'm sorry, for specific sub-agencies. You can filter for subdomains for the reports that are that work with that domain filter. So rather, I used in my example census.gov, but let's say you wanted to use, ncbi.nlm.nah.gov. You can certainly use that in the domain filter, and it will work. And then if you were at a sub-agency and you were looking to try to put together a lot of information, you'd have to actually know all the individual domains that you were interested in that sub-agency, and then probably run multiple queries. But so happy to say you can filter by subdomains. Sorry to say that at this point you can't filter by sub-agency.
Awesome, great. And our third and final question is, can you elaborate on what kinds of data are available? Is it pretty much exclusively how many visits within various domain or agency, device, etc. categories?
Yes, and apologies that maybe I didn't go over that enough. But here's the reports that we have, right? So we have downloads, and that's classified in our Google Analytics as files that have a certain extension. So that's PDFs, and we even track JPEGs, things like that, .doc, .xls. Various different forms of downloads are tracked here. And so you can see data on the most popular downloads across government or for an agency. We also have traffic source, so where traffic is coming from, and this would be, maybe you get an idea of percentage of traffic that's coming from, let's say, google.com versus referrals or something like that. So you can get information on that. We've got device model for mobile devices, so you can even understand if someone's visiting on a Samsung Galaxy versus an iPhone or something like that, and that helps if you're a designer. It helps folks design for optimum mobile responsivity, specifically setting breakpoints for different resolutions. I showed you the domain and site reports, and second level domain is just, it's specific to something.gov. So it's not a subdomain, it only has one dot in the domain, and it's the .gov. We've got language information. So this is based on how people have their browser set for their language. So I might be visiting from a location that is somewhere in a different country, but if I have my browser set to English, that's how we get that data. We've got an operating system and browser breakdown, which is kind of cool. So you can see here, we've got the operating system is Macintosh and the browser is Safari, those kinds of things. So we combine those two different data points and show you that. We also have Windows by browser, the Windows version by browser. We've got IE, like general operating system, versions of Windows, and so on. So there's quite a few different things that you can see here. It's not all just visits, but it is geared mainly towards, I would say, technology that folks are using, and things that are happening on the site, whether it be downloads or how they got there.
Great. And we have another question. Is there any way to easily compare two data sets, such as energy.gov versus commerce? Or are those two separate queries, and then I have to do the heavy lifting?
Yeah, that's a good question. At this point in the stage of the API, I think you'd have to do the heavy lifting and do two different queries. We don't have a comparison structure built in quite yet. You could, if it was two different domains that were in the same agency, you could do an agency report, and then you'd have to do some work maybe to do a comparison whether it be in a spreadsheet or in a tool that was consuming the data. But if it's like two different agencies, I think your best bet would probably to have two separate queries that specified the domain that you were interested in, and then do the comparison, outside of the API.
Great. Those are all the questions that we have. If anyone else on the call has any questions, please enter those now.
While I'm giving people the last couple seconds to do that, I will note that even though we weren't able to use YouTube Live today, this is also still being recorded. And within a few hours, we should have it up so that you can reference it along with the slides that are available on the digital.gov page. I certainly, if you have friends that would be interested who could not make this webinar, we encourage you to share the video with them. And we hope to hear from some of you on what you plan on doing with this data. Freddie, any last questions?
There are no last questions.
Okay, awesome. Well, in that case, I will go ahead and wrap up. This was a pretty quick webinar, but we hope it was informative. I thank you all for joining us today and for bearing with us through that technical link switch. But thank you so much to the DigitalGov University team, Alex Schulte, Lauren Rabb, and Jeremy Ziller for working really hard to make sure we didn't have to reschedule today. And we look forward to seeing some or all of you on our future trainings. Have a great day.